Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is boarding a flight, packing a suitcase, or driving down a dark highway to attend a funeral. You have probably done it yourself. It is an exhausting, expensive, and deeply emotional journey that we take for granted as a standard part of being human. We view it as a personal duty, a final sign of respect for someone we love. But if you strip away the modern highways, the airports, and the digital invitations, this ordinary act of traveling to honor the dead reveals a hidden truth about our species. It is an instinct so ancient and so powerful that it helped build the very blueprint of human civilization. For decades, we believed that early human migration was driven entirely by physical survival. Mainstream history taught us that our ancestors moved across the globe to chase mammoth herds, escape shifting climates, or find fertile soil. But here's the thing. Archaeologists digging into the ancient past keep finding a bizarre anomaly that contradicts this purely practical view of survival. They are uncovering undeniable scientific evidence that ancient humans routinely undertook grueling, highly dangerous journeys spanning up to 1,000 miles, not to find food and not to settle new lands. They did it to attend a funeral. The real question is, why? In a world where every single calorie mattered and where stepping into unknown territory could mean death by predation, starvation, or hostile tribes, why would prehistoric people risk everything just to bury someone who was already gone? To understand why, we have to look at the unique psychology and environmental pressures of early humans. Unlike any other creature on Earth, humans possess a profound, agonizing awareness of our own mortality. But thousands of years ago, this awareness brought an evolutionary crisis. If life is fleeting and dangerous, why cooperate with people outside your immediate genetic family? In the harsh landscapes of the prehistoric world, a small, isolated clan could easily be wiped out by a single bad winter or a sudden illness. Survival required scaling up. It demanded that completely unrelated groups of humans find a way to trust each other, share resources, and form alliances. This is where the psychology of ritual stepped in. Grief is a devastating human emotion, but when it is shared through a collective ritual, it acts as a social superglue. A funeral wasn't just a way to say goodbye to the deceased. It was a mechanism to forge a shared identity across vast, empty spaces. The earliest reliable evidence of this behavior takes us back tens of thousands of years into the Upper Paleolithic period. Consider the famous discovery at the Sungir site in modern-day Russia. Scientists uncovered the graves of individuals buried with thousands of meticulously carved mammoth ivory beads, heavy spears, and distinct ornaments. The sheer amount of labor required to create these grave goods is staggering, with experts estimating thousands of hours of work for a single burial. But the real surprise came when researchers analyzed the materials. Many of the decorative shells and specific stones used in these burial outfits originated hundreds of miles away from the site itself. So what does this mean? It means that even during the height of the Ice Age, the dead were not simply covered with dirt and forgotten. Their clothing and ornaments represented vast networks of interaction. The consequence of this find was monumental. It proved that long before the invention of the wheel or writing, humans maintained geographic connections that spanned entire ecosystems, driven specifically by the need to honor their deceased. Now it gets interesting, because as human societies grew, the scale of these funerary journeys escalated dramatically. What began as an individual act of mourning within a single cave slowly expanded to include entire families, then neighboring clans, and eventually whole regions. Think about that transition. As communities grew, the funeral transformed from a private moment of grief into a massive geopolitical event. Instead of moving just a few miles to a local burial site, human populations began coordinating their movements on a continental scale. They built entire geographical networks centered around the dead, transforming empty landscapes into sacred, interconnected regions. Let's look at a striking example from the Neolithic era at the famous monument of Stonehenge in the United Kingdom. For a long time, people assumed Stonehenge was primarily an astronomical calendar or a temple to the sun. But recent archaeological breakthroughs at the nearby site of Durrington Walls have completely flipped this narrative. Scientists conducted strontium isotope analysis on the teeth of ancient pigs and cattle found buried in mass feasting pits around the monument. Because isotope signatures reflect the specific water and soil of the region where an animal grew up, the results left researchers stunned. These animals hadn't been raised near Stonehenge. They had been brought from the furthest corners of Scotland, Wales, and western Britain. Ancient people were herding livestock across hundreds of miles of rugged terrain, converging on the landscape around Stonehenge during the winter solstice. They weren't migrating to live there permanently. They were arriving to participate in monumental funerary feasts and ancestor rituals, transforming a lonely stone circle into the cultural heart of an entire island. But that is only part of the story. If we cross the Atlantic Ocean to the ancient Americas, the scale becomes even more mind-boggling. Around 2,000 years ago, the Hopewell tradition flourished in what is now Ohio. The Hopewell people built massive, mathematically precise earthwork complexes and burial mounds. When archaeologists excavated these mounds, they discovered a treasure trove of exotic materials buried with the dead. They found shimmering sheets of mica from the Appalachian Mountains, silver from Canada, shark teeth from the Gulf of Mexico, and beautifully carved obsidian blades. Chemical fingerprinting revealed that this obsidian came directly from the volcanic fields of Yellowstone, Wyoming, well over 1,500 miles away. Historians are certain that the Hopewell did not have an empire, nor did they have a professional merchant class. Instead, individual travelers and pilgrims made these epic continental journeys across rivers and forests, carrying sacred materials to deposit into the burial mounds of revered leaders and ancestors. Now, zoom out for a moment and consider a different kind of discovery that shifts our perspective even further. In the Western Alps of Europe, researchers discovered beautiful, pristine axes made of a rare green stone called jadeite. These axes were polished to perfection, showing absolutely no signs of wear or practical use. Instead, they traveled thousands of miles across Neolithic Europe only to be deliberately buried in ritual contexts or graves. To the people of that era, these axes weren't tools for cutting wood. They were sacred items tied to the spiritual journey of the dead. Why waste precious energy carrying a non-functional stone across an entire continent just to bury it in the ground? Because the act of transporting and burying these objects re-established trust and trade alliances between distant tribes who might otherwise view each other as enemies. Even our extinct cousins, the Neanderthals, seem to have participated in the early stages of this behavior. In sites like Cueva de los Aviones in Spain, scientists found perforated seashells stained with red pigments dating back before modern humans ever arrived in Europe. While the exact nature of Neanderthal burial rituals is still fiercely debated among anthropologists, these finds suggest that the impulse to use symbolic objects to mark identity, life, and death is older than our own species. Then we have the enigmatic site of Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, dating back over 11,000 years. This massive stone complex features T-shaped pillars carved with fierce animals, built by hunter-gatherers long before the invention of agriculture. Archaeologists found no signs of domestic life, no permanent houses, and no nearby water sources. It was a cathedral in the wilderness. The consensus among experts is that hunter-gatherer bands traveled from up to 100 miles away to gather at this site. Evidence points heavily to ancestor veneration and funerary rituals. It was a place where different groups met to bury their dead, share stories, and reinforce their social contracts. This pattern repeats everywhere we look. Consider the Amesbury archer, a wealthy man buried near Stonehenge. Isotopic analysis of his teeth revealed that he did not grow up in Britain at all. He spent his childhood in Central Europe, near the Alps. He traveled hundreds of miles across land and sea, carrying advanced metalworking technology with him, only to spend his final days and be buried near the sacred stone monument. His journey represents a massive transfer of knowledge, all anchored to a sacred ritual landscape. When you connect all these dots, you realize that the funeral was the ultimate catalyst for human innovation. To understand why civilization developed the way it did, we have to flip our traditional understanding of history on its head. We often assume that humans first invented trade routes to exchange practical goods like salt, grain, or copper, and that rituals simply followed the trade. But the archaeological evidence suggests the exact opposite. The earliest long-distance tracks across continents were not carved out by merchants looking for profit, but by mourners looking for connection. The infrastructure of global trade was born out of the infrastructure of the funeral, the need to transport sacred grave goods like Yellowstone obsidian, Baltic amber, or alpine jadeite forced early humans to develop navigation skills, build watercraft, and establish peaceful diplomatic protocols with strangers. The funeral created the market, not the other way around. This brings us directly back to the modern world. When you look out the window of an airplane today, or find yourself stuck in holiday traffic on an interstate highway, you are looking at the direct descendants of those ancient ritual pathways. The global transportation networks we use to conduct international business, ship consumer goods, and vacation across oceans were mapped out thousands of years ago by feet walking toward a burial mound. Our modern economy runs on tracks laid down by ancient grief. Ultimately, those ancient humans who walked 1,000 miles across a wild, unforgiving continent to attend a funeral were doing something far grander than merely burying a body. They were weaving the very fabric of human society. They recognized that while death separates us individually, the collective response to death is what binds us permanently. So the next time you see someone packing a bag, rushing to catch a flight, or driving through the night to attend a funeral, remember that you are witnessing one of the oldest and most consequential instincts of our species. You started here, looking at a simple modern journey of personal duty. Now you understand what was hidden behind it. We never truly left those ancient paths. We just paved them.